I'm Kent McGuire. I'm the Health and Safety Coordinator for the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences at Ohio State. And so I work with the safety compliance and safety of our faculty, staff, and students on main campus, our research farms, and our extension offices. Because Glenn's right, this is a very important aspect. So some of the things we're going to look at is I want to identify hazards with manure storage areas, review dangerous gases associated with those manure storage areas, and discuss some safety considerations and safety equipment needed if you're working around those storage areas. The hazards that we typically see, and within our OSU Ag Safety Group, we track all agricultural related fatalities in the state as well as serious injuries. And so when we look at those, some of the things that we do is we look at that root cause, but we look at what that farmer or that agricultural employee is doing. So some of the hazards that we see in manure storage are obviously the dangerous gases, where I'm going to spend the majority of my time this morning, potential drowning, and then equipment hazards, where you have those cut points, crush points, things like that. If you were in the previous session, you saw all of the equipment and the different application methods that Glenn was showing. And so we're working around the tankers, the applicators, the tractor, the agitator, all those equipment, or all that equipment, and so we need to be concerned with some of those other physical hazards associated with the equipment. So with those hazards in mind, why would anybody go around or go into a manure storage area? And I think Glenn kind of summed it up a little bit, but these are some of those headlines that we see over time. Farmer age 25 entered a pit to change the nozzle. Child age 4 exploring fell into an uncovered pit opening. One of the things that we typically see, especially in an emergency situation, is sometimes it's not just one victim. Okay, for example, father and son, age 43 and 21, went into the pit to do some work, overcame by gases. Son went in to save the dad, and now we have 2 victims. Okay, and that's why it's very important to think about the hazards that are in front of you and know how to handle them. When we look at dangerous gases with manure storage, we typically look at 4 different gases: hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and methane. And we'll go through each one of those. Hydrogen sulfide, that's our most dangerous gas. It has that strong rotten egg smell to it. Why it's so dangerous is the fact that it deadens your senses. It deadens your sense of smell. It can paralyze the nerves that make you breathe. The other thing to think about, it's heavier than air. So it will stay low. It'll stay down in that pit or in that low area. Okay? And it's also flammable. Under OSHA guidelines, 10 parts per million is an allowable exposure for humans over an 8-hour period, over a normal work day. 10 parts per million, that's not very much. Okay? At 1,000 parts per million, it can become lethal. It paralyzes those nerves, and it becomes lethal at that point. Carbon dioxide is the next one. Carbon dioxide is basically what humans and animals breathe out. It's what we exhaust. Okay? So where this comes into a situation is where we have a barn or a confinement area that's full of animals. All right? That carbon dioxide could build up. Where it becomes dangerous is it actually displaces oxygen. Does anybody know what is the percentage of oxygen in the air we need to breathe to sustain life? Anybody know what the percentage of oxygen is? Anybody awake yet this morning? A few people. Around 19%, 19 to 20%. For us, we have to have that amount of oxygen as we breathe in. Okay, so if carbon dioxide overtakes that, all right, it may reduce that oxygen content that we would breathe in to 17, 16, 15%. And then it becomes harmful to us. We're not getting enough oxygen. Okay. The other thing I want to bring up, and this is not typically associated with manure pit or manure storage gases, but carbon monoxide. All right. I always used to get carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide mixed up and confused. Okay. We do see carbon monoxide situations where you may be running equipment inside a confinement area. You hear about it on the news with furnaces and things like that. Carbon monoxide is typically it's produced by that combustible equipment. Okay, one of the easy ways to remember that is monoxide comes from the muffler. Okay, that's the easiest way to kind of remember the difference between the two. Okay. Like I said, it's typically not associated with manure pit gases, but we're running equipment and things, and sometimes we get into those confined areas where, again, the carbon monoxide itself can displace the oxygen. Ammonia. We've all had that smell before. Okay? Here again, this is heavier than air. It has that distinct odor to it. It burns the eyes and the nose and the throat, and it doesn't take very much to create that sensation. It's found in almost all animal buildings. And again, 50 parts per million is the allowable exposure for humans over an 8-hour period. It doesn't take very much. And then the last one is methane. This one is odorless. It's lighter than air, so it will actually rise. Okay? It's highly flammable, and it's explosive at 50,000 parts per million. Okay, in this case, OSHA will allow 1,000 parts per million exposure for humans over an 8-hour period. All right, so let's talk about agitation, because this is where we really kind of get into that problem with some of these manure pit gases or manure storage gases. All right, we know that agitation is critical for maintaining useful volume and slurry within your system. Without agitation, solids and sludge will build up over time and reduce useful volume. Agitation resuspends, those settled solids and creates that slurry likely to flow through your pump, and it creates that manure mixture and provides a more consistent nutrient analysis. So we know the importance of agitation, but there are some safety concerns. All right, when we agitate those storage areas, we potentially release those toxic gases. All right. So when we're agitating, remove animals or humans from the building if possible, especially under those underfloor pits, and try to get your ventilation going and open that building up and get that airflow through if you can. This is even the case with some of your outdoor storage areas. Okay, above ground storage areas, like a slurry store or even a concrete structure like this, when you agitate, you can release those gases. And even in an outdoor facility, the concentration of those gases, if there's somebody relatively close, they can be overcome by that. Think about in this situation, if you agitate this and an individual standing down here by the tractor, remember 3 of those 4 are heavier than air. So where are they going to go? Up over the sides and straight down towards the equipment. Dangers with lagoons and outdoor storage areas. Sometimes those holding ponds will create a crust, right? And especially if you have a long dry period. It'll create crust and it'll appear, much like you can see here, it will appear like stable ground, right? The problem is children or somebody that's not familiar with your farm operation or even livestock will walk across this, and then there's the potential for a drowning incident. So some precautions you should take to prevent that drowning. If you have an outdoor storage area, whether it's a lagoon or a concrete holding facility, it should be fenced so there's limited entrance to it. You should have life-saving devices, and you should also have, I don't have it mentioned there, but you also should have some signage up that warn others what that area is. Okay? Because think about the fact that should somebody fall into an outdoor storage facility and it becomes a rescue situation, think about the different characteristics. It's very similar to a pond with the exception of the content within it. All right? You have those suspended solids, the density and the clarity. There's no visibility, okay, compared to a regular pond. All right? So those differences make it much more difficult to become a rescue situation. In many cases, unfortunately, it becomes a retrieval by your first responders. The other thing to consider with these outdoor storage facilities, you're using equipment within close proximity. And so as you can see here, we're right next to the steep bank of that lagoon. All right, and we've seen those cases where you get close to the point where all of a sudden it's a rollover or a roll in, and now the situation becomes one of these two. Okay? That does you no good for your operation or good for the equipment. All right, so let's talk quickly about safety equipment. All right, if you must enter the pit, okay, things that need to be considered. Shut down any agitation or equipment. Ventilate the pit before entering. Probably one of the most key things you can do is monitor that air quality. Okay? I would recommend you wear a self-contained breathing apparatus. This is going to supply you with the oxygen that you need, or with breathable air that you need in the event that there is a toxic gas within the pit. Okay? Wear a safety harness attached to a lifeline, and always have at least 2 people at the entrance of the pit. Okay? The reason we recommend 2 people, one is that entry attendant. They never leave that point until you come back out. The second person, if there's an emergency, they can go for help. They can call 911, they can direct first responders and things like that. That first person never leaves that entry point until you come out. So have a plan before entry. We'll talk about plans here in just a second. When it comes to equipment, I'm going to go back to like the air quality monitors, like the yellow monitor right there. They're not cheap. They're anywhere from $400 or $500 to, you can buy the elaborate ones to $2,000 or $3,000. The one shown here is about a $500 model. But if you check that prior to going in, it's going to tell you what your oxygen level is. It's going to tell you if there's hydrogen sulfide present. They're going to tell you if there's the lower explosive limit. So if there is a methane gas issue, it's going to tell you what the quality is of that environment down inside the pit. With that in mind, I know everybody can't just go out and buy an air quality monitor, but check with your county emergency management or your local fire department. My suggestion too would be start to build a relationship with your local fire department so that, as first responders, they know what's on your farm and they know the potential hazards in manure storage areas that you have. But you can check with your local fire and emergency management. And I know in some counties they will actually let you borrow an air quality monitor. So if you are going into you do have to go into your pit to do work or change out a part. You can check that. I know Glenn has told me that in Paulding County they will do that, and I know some other counties they do that as well. The other thing with safety equipment, you may be able to borrow a tripod or what they call a retrieval hoist, so you could hook your lifeline to that. Should you go down, that attendant can literally pull you up out of the pit. Nobody has to go in. So there may be other equipment you may be able to borrow as well. I mentioned before, have a plan before entry. In industry, we always use a confined space entry permit. This is the one we use at Ohio State. You can download that at our Ag Safety website under the Employee Safety tab. The nice thing about a confined entry permit is as you walk down through it and fill it out and check the boxes, it's helping you develop a plan. It's helping you to think about what are the hazards and what do I have to deal with as I go down into that entry. We also use this for our grain bins as well. If we have to go into a grain bin, it gives us the opportunity to think through the process and what hazards, what equipment do we need, and so forth. So some other safety considerations: keep the site maintained and free from clutter. Post signs stating that the area is a manure storage area. Keep pit access securely covered, or if it's an open area, that secure perimeter so that people or livestock can't just walk into the lagoon. And have that life-saving equipment available at the lagoon site. Agitation equipment and potential. Think about the agitation equipment and the potential effects of agitating. All right? Think that through before you agitate that lagoon or pit. All right? What potential hazards, which way is the wind blowing, things like that. Can I ventilate the building, and so on. Have patience during agitation. Let the agitator do the work. If you're running a hydraulic or PTO driven agitator, think about the tractor you're putting on that. In your situation, is it better to have a tractor with a cab on it, or is it better to have an open cab tractor? All right? And again, that's going to depend on what's your wind direction, how could the potential hazard get to me at the, a potential gas get to me at the tractor, and so on. Never work or recognize those equipment hazards. Again, PTO, cut points, wrap points, crush points, any of those types of things. Never work alone. At least have somebody with you, or at least let somebody know where you're at so that they can check on you. And one of the keys to that is also have communications. CB radio, two-way radios. Everybody has a cell phone now. So communicate with each other. And then also, if you have an isolated facility, maybe your barns are not where you live, have somebody, maybe there's a neighbor that can keep an eye on, activities even after hours or when nobody's around. Here's an important aspect too. Include manure storage areas in your farm's emergency action plan. I work with a lot of large farms around the state to develop emergency action plans, and we think about what are those potential emergencies or hazards. And you can pre-plan with first responders, but when you're taking that aerial photo or mapping out your farm, include those manure storage areas on that emergency action plan. And then also with that emergency action plan, have emergency phone numbers readily available. Identify what equipment's needed in a possible emergency, and so on. The other thing is train your family members or employees to recognize the hazards. Train them on how to properly operate the equipment and how to respond in the event of an emergency. Okay, so we'll see, I got that done in good time, Glenn. Right on time, right?
You're doing great.
So I want to summarize some things here. First and foremost, realize it can happen. Okay? Don't become that next headline. I want to create that light bulb moment for you to think about in your own operation, that the light bulb comes on to say, wait a minute, I need to think this through for a second. So realize it can happen to you. Recognize the hazards associated with manure storage and handling. Planning ahead is key. Okay? Plan ahead, create your emergency action plan, talk with your local fire department and EMA so that they know the hazards and know the potential emergencies on your farm. And then training for your families and employees are essential. Take the time to show those employees and your family members the hazards and how to correct them and how to operate your equipment in an efficient, proper manner.